passenger in seat 17 Tatisto. How the hell do I know her? I racked my brains going through all the women I knew. I reviewed them one by one. My region, gym, family friends, job. One by one I brushed aside, and yet I was 100% sure that I had seen her before. Somehow I knew her. Knowing about her gave me an unpleasant feeling of being unattainable and irritated the hell out of me. I hated unsolved mysteries. I hated them because I knew my brain would keep working to solve the mystery, and I would do something annoying, like wake up at 3 in the morning with the answer. I watched as she took off her coat and put it in the overhead compartment where she already kept her carry-on luggage. She glanced in my direction, and although her lips smiled slightly, I saw no recognition in her gaze. Perhaps I was wrong in thinking that I knew her, but I didn't think so. I settled into my seat, cursing the faceless administrative employee who had reserved me the center seat instead of the window or aisle seat. The lady of mystery had no such problems and sat by the window. Once again I studied her profile, trying to pull out from my memory the knowledge of where and how I knew her. I continued to watch her through the gap between the seats as she dug through her purse, finally pulling out her cell phone and placing it on the empty seat next to her. She leaned forward, her dark hair hiding her face, and she carefully pushed her purse under the seat in front of her. She straightened up, picking up her phone from the seat next to her. I looked away, wanting to respect her privacy, as she entered the PIN code, unlocking it. When I looked again, I smiled. I finally had the answer to my riddle. In the background of her phone was a happy picture of her with none other than Jonathan Carstairs, our head of engineering. Thanks to Jonathan, I became the installation manager. He was the first to see through my disguise of modesty of my intellect. He was there for me when Sue slept with Carl, her boss, just as I was there for him when his first wife cheated on him. He told me many times over the following years that whenever he had dark thoughts, he would hear my signature Sue line, "So why did you have sex with him?" And he would laugh and instantly feel better. He was my mentor and took me with him on his rise through the ranks. More than once I sat next to him at his desk, going over the plan, and saw a photograph of him and his wife, Priscilla Carstairs. She was a little older now. Her hair was a little longer, but it was definitely her. I smiled, feeling satisfied. The mystery has been solved. I thought about introducing myself again. We met a few times in the early years when she was still attending Christmas office parties, but her lack of acknowledgement earlier told me she didn't remember me. I'm not surprised. The Priscilla I remembered always preferred to communicate with management rather than with the guys in production. Despite her memorable aloofness, if she had been sitting next to me, I would have refreshed her memory. But sitting in the row in front of me, I decided not to. The conversation would have been too awkward, and despite the fact that the flight wasn't completely full, a rarity for a Friday to Brisbane, I wasn't about to ask the flight attendant to move me. I opened my crossword book and, intending to take one last look at it, reached into my shirt pocket for a pen. I stopped midway, taking off from my seat. My rush to stand up only stopped by my seatbelt. Here it is, on her screen. There was a photo in full color that was definitely not Jonathan. First of all, this guy was black. Secondly, he was an order of magnitude younger than Jonathan. And somehow I couldn't imagine Jonathan taking a selfie with his jeans unzipped, his other hand holding a very aroused male private part. Words jumped off the screen, eating into my brain. Hurry up, lover. In my opinion, there was only one interpretation. She was heading out on a date. She was just another cheater. I felt sorry for Jonathan. He didn't deserve this. Not again. If anyone knew what a devoted family man he was, it was me. One look at his office will tell the dumbest stranger that he loved his wife, children, and grandchildren. Her children. Hell, they weren't even his biological ones. Jonathan adopted them and treated them as his own. I didn't care what her reasons were. I didn't care if she thought he was indifferent, boring, a workaholic, or inconsiderate. There was no excuse. If she was unhappy in her marriage, she had to take steps to solve the problems or leave. She had to finish one thing before starting another. The old pain, the old rage, the old disgust flared up again, taking me by surprise. Old instincts also resurfaced, and my hand continued to move towards my pocket, But instead of taking the pen, I curled my fingers around my mobile. For a split second, I hesitated, letting the thought that Jonathan knew and approved of his wife's behavior swirl through my mind. I shook my head at the thought. Impossible. Jonathan was too much of a man to do such a cowardly thing. As if to confirm my conviction, my eyes were drawn to her left hand. I grinned darkly. She took off her rings and even put a plaster on her finger to hide all traces that she was wearing any. Perhaps she thought it was a sign of respect for Jonathan and their marriage, that removing her rings somehow made her a better person or less of a cheater. Not in my eyes. Jonathan was a good guy. He deserved better than a cheating wife. He didn't deserve a stupid wife, and she should be one. One or the other. Jonathan would never forgive her if he found out. Not with his story, not after his first wife did. Fragments of drunken swearing flooded my brain. I'll kill this bitch and her worthless boyfriend before I let her take my house and move in with her lover. This bitch will get a nasty surprise if she thinks I'm going to lay under her and let her walk away with all our property. Property that I fucking earned us. But she did it. Thanks to the gay judge with hairy armpits who suggested that all men were scoundrels and deserved punishment, she led him to bankruptcy, and all he had left was the crumbling cottage that his mother left him. In fact, it was after I saw Jonathan get ripped off in the courts that I hatched a plan to stop Sue from doing the same to me. I secretly took a screenshot of her and then a distant shot to catch her profile. I wasn't sure what I would do with the photos. On the one hand, I wanted to send them to Jonathan immediately. On the other hand, I didn't want to be the bearer of such devastating news. His first divorce almost destroyed him. It took him many years to even start dating women, let alone trust anyone again. I put the phone away. Another passenger was now sitting next to me, and I didn't want him to alert Priscilla or one of the flight attendants that I was filming Priscilla without her knowledge. The 2-hour flight was agony. Every time I saw Priscilla through the crack, I was filled with disgust and longed for the opportunity to write to Jonathan about her betrayal. Was this already a betrayal? Perhaps she was on her way to her first date. Perhaps I was witnessing only the latest act in a long series of betrayals. I've been thinking about this and what I can conclude from the data I have. A photograph of his private parts, a plaster on her finger, probably to hide the dent and shadow of her wedding ring. My principles interrupted my thoughts. It just didn't matter. I even started composing an email, but every time I thought about sending it, I saw Jonathan's face in the months after the end of his first marriage. I saw his proud smile as he showed me the latest photographs of his adopted son and daughter, or their children. I heard his voice as he talked about how his eldest grandson called him grandfather for the first time during his last visit. God, how he loved his adopted children. It would kill him to lose them and their children. Did I have the right to do this to him after everything he had done for me? Did I have the right not to inform him of something so important to his happiness as this? And will he lose them at all? I have always been a determined person. I have proven this beyond a shadow of a doubt in a million work and personal decisions. Why was it so difficult for me to make this decision? Just to prove my loyalty to a man to whom I owe much, I had to destroy a large part of his soul. Could I do it? Could I not do this? What would I want Jonathan to do if our roles were reversed? Easily. I would like the problem to go away and never come back. Thus the solution to my dilemma was born. However, a piece of the puzzle was missing. Did Mrs. Carstairs care about Jonathan, or was it cheating before the divorce? If the latter were her preparations for the ambush on Jonathan complete, if I warn him now, will he be less likely to be robbed when it happens? Hell, he was only a few years away from retirement. Uncertain, I developed a plan that I thought covered all the aspects that needed to be considered. This would minimize my interference, thus easing my conscience, while at the same time protecting my friend and mentor from a cheating wife or an ambush. It would also leave the end result in the hands of the gods, and that appealed to my aging, benevolent beliefs. I'll give the bitch a chance to show her true colors and her intentions. I will give her the opportunity to minimize the damage that has already been done. I will give her a chance to return to being faithful to her husband. I'll give her the choice that I don't think she gave Jonathan. If she proves through her actions that this is not what she wants, then Jonathan will be notified. Priscilla. I crushed to the corner, pressed against the small window so I could look at Paul's photo again without risking the guy next to me seeing it. Paul looked so delicious. It wasn't that his privates were any bigger than Jonathan's. In fact, Jonathan's probably had more thickness. But the darkness was new after all my years with John. Absolutely, Paula. That's what Jonathan had lost. It wasn't that he was out of shape, but Paul was 25 years younger and couldn't compare. Paul knew he was attractive. This was obvious from the confidence of his posture. It was sexy and provocative, and I definitely felt provoked. I looked a little longer, giddy at the thought of what I would be doing with this private part in a few short hours. Later, unfortunately, on the flight home, I will have to delete the image. But for now, I could enjoy it. And I really did enjoy it. Perhaps too much, if the need to squeeze my legs together to relieve the throbbing pain at the top of my thighs was any indication. My eyes followed the line of his six-pack abs, and my fingers tingled with memories of the last time I was with him, and I did just that. As the plane leveled off, I stole a glance to the side, confirming that the guy in the next seat was already immersed in Dan Brown's latest bestseller. Okay, I won't have to talk him out of talking. I stared at Paul's handsome manhood and abs for a moment longer, imprinting the image in my mind, and then turned off the phone. Smiling, I closed my eyes and let my mind wander back to my last date with Paul. We agreed to meet in Sydney, at a small B&B overlooking the harbor for our first night away. Sydney was neutral territory where neither of us were likely to run into anyone we knew. I'd like to say we were romantic and went sightseeing and had lunch or dinner first before getting naked, but I'd be lying if I said that. Overwhelmed by passion, we never left the room after check-in. And that was the difference. That's what made it so addictive and addictive with Paul. I loved Jonathan and he loved me, but after so many years together, our love was not driven by passion. She was gentle and caring, every touch a declaration of love. With Paul, my animal instincts came alive. All I wanted was to rip his clothes off and let him inside me. There was no love, no tenderness, just two people using each other's bodies for sexual pleasure and release. If I had thought that the fact that we had 2 nights together meant a slower pace or more affection, I would have been disappointed. Paul continued to have me as if he had a stick of dynamite strapped to his ass. My chest tingles, remembering how Paul greedily chewed and kissed it without loving caresses. This was not lovemaking, it was greedy hunger. It made me feel young, sexy, and desirable. Paul's resilience was something to admire. I squirmed in place, remembering how I had clenched and throbbed as he made me experience pleasure after pleasure until I was a limp rag beneath him, begging for mercy. After some rest and a hot shower, we did it again. This time I leaned over the cabinet, still wet from the shower. Needless to say, we needed another shower to clean us up in preparation for another sex session. In fact, that's all we did all weekend. Have sex, wash our faces, and eat. Thank goodness Jonathan was on a rare field trip to the Kimberley Fields and wasn't due home for another 5 days, giving me time to rest, heal, and get tight again. Jonathan was lovemaking. Floor, raw animal sex. Jonathan left me feeling loved and valued. Floor, saturated and exhausted. I loved and wanted both. Passenger in seat 17B. If it weren't for my current situation, I would have enjoyed a quiet chuckle at the expense of my fellow travelers. It has always been surprising that the moment the fasten seatbelts sign goes out, there is a massive rush of everyone into the aisle, a mad scramble to get your carry-on luggage out of the overhead compartments, despite then having to wait a long time to actually get off the plane. Normally, I would wait until the plane was nearly empty before packing my things, but since my plan required me to keep Priscilla a relatively short distance ahead, I joined the rest of the economy class passengers in the aisle. By allowing the gentleman next to me and the passengers opposite to gather first, I managed to position myself 4 people behind Priscilla. She showed no signs of recognizing me earlier, but I didn't want to risk that it was an accidental mistake on her part. I maintained my distance as we crossed the air bridge into the terminal. As I suspected, she headed to baggage claim. Women like Priscilla always took luggage with them. The carousel was motionless. The cargo had not yet been unloaded. My target scanned all the faces in the room before turning his gaze to the exit. She tapped her foot impatiently and looked at her watch. As the first piece of luggage began to spin, her gaze moved between the carousel and the exit. When her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and she even took a step towards the doors as she raised her hand to wave, I turned to look in the same direction. I couldn't help but snort contemptuously. Like a cliché, her partner looked significantly younger than I knew Priscilla to be. I waited as he hurried towards her, hoping that their greeting would let me know whether this was their first meeting or one of many meetings. My heart sank. I closed my eyes, letting the air escape, but the lovers. And now I knew that this was exactly what they were. Showed no signs of embarrassment, awkwardness, or clumsiness. For a moment I doubted my plan. The bitch was guilty as hell, but the thought of Jonathan, now in his 60s, having to deal with the betrayal of his second wife, his love and trust, kept me on the right path. Decision confirmed, I secretly photographed their passionate embrace. Sliding the phone back into my pocket, I walked towards the couple, and while she was still in his arms, their lips locked, I tapped her on the shoulder. I heard the wet slap of their lips parting, and I shuddered in disgust. Even after many years of Sue and the divorces I had seen among colleagues and friends due to a cheating spouse, I still could not understand how one partner could be so disloyal to another whom he had promised to love and appreciate. To me, this was still the worst kind of betrayal one partner could commit against the other. Sorry, I almost smiled at my banal words. Mrs. Carstairs, you demonstrated on the plane that you don't remember me, but unfortunately for you, I remember you. Her spin to face me coincided with a sigh from her companion. Mrs.? We both ignored him. Who you are? She demanded, examining my features. Then, as I watched, her eyes turned halfway towards her lover. Was it the worry in her eyes, that he had just found out something she wanted to hide? It was only a moment before her full attention returned to me. I could almost hear the gears of her brain turning in memory, trying to accommodate me. I held back a smile when no light of recognition appeared in her gaze. Unfortunately for her, she was like many born into privilege, and was oblivious to those she considered beneath her. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is who you are, or better yet, who you're married to. Married? Scylla? Her lover intervened. You said you were divorced and have been for many years. Paul, honey, please give me a minute, I can explain. I've been separated for a long time. My ex just doesn't want to admit we're over and is dragging out the divorce. I watched as he examined her face. His uncertainty was clear as day. I thought about confirming his doubts, but I wanted her choice to be sincere and not decided because her lover left her. Anything less would be unfair to Jonathan. Please give me a moment with Mr. She paused, waiting for me to introduce my name. I simply raised my eyebrow and replied, Dave. Just give me a minute with, Dave, to sort this out, and then we can enjoy our weekend as planned. She was convincing. I have to admit it. If I hadn't heard Jonathan talk about their upcoming trip to Perth to visit their son earlier this week, I would have believed her. The beloved nodded reluctantly. I felt his gaze on my back as Priscilla grabbed my forearm and pulled me away from my hearing. Now, although this is none of your business, as I said, I am divided. I appreciate your concern for my soon-to-be ex-husband, but I really must insist that you leave me alone and don't interfere in what doesn't concern you. I was tempted to applaud her. She was such a good actress, but I kept my game plan in mind. She needed to make a choice freely and clearly, not under the pressure of a lack of options. Wow, you're good, I said, smiling benevolently for my lover's benefit. So if you're so divided, who is Jonathan taking to Perth next week to visit Jared? She gasped and looked at me more closely. I felt her irritation with me that she could not remember me. Regardless, she now knew that I knew Jonathan well enough to be aware of his plans. I'll cut the conversation short, Priscilla. I'll give you a choice, one that you must carefully consider. Yes, a choice and a chance. What are you even talking about? She was impatient. Her behavior irritated me, and I again thought about giving her the opportunity to save her marriage. By giving Jonathan a chance to avoid pain, I was offering his wife something I didn't think she deserved. I became more determined, thinking, I'm doing this for Jonathan, not her. I'm talking about giving you a choice between Jonathan and your lover. I'm talking about giving you a chance to save your marriage and spare your husband enormous pain that we both know he doesn't deserve. He saved you and your children from poverty. And now, how did you repay it? She turned pale, and for the first time seemed unsure of herself. Then I realized that for the last 2 minutes, I had only seen a facade in front of me. Instead of being a confident woman in complete control of the situation, she was a frightened wife whose world was about to collapse. Ah, not so separated, I see. What do you want? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm offering you something that, frankly, I don't think you deserve, but against my better judgment, I'm giving you a chance to avoid Jonathan finding out about your lover. I am giving you a chance to save your marriage. Her shoulders slumped slightly, but since she was standing sideways to her lover, I doubted he noticed. What do I need to do? You don't have to do anything. Weren't you listening? I'm giving you a choice. She nodded, and I smiled. It's almost noon. I'm giving you until 4:30 Melbourne time to call me from code 03 confirming you're back in Melbourne, or I'll send Jonathan the email I've already prepared with these 3 attachments. I took my phone out of my pocket and quickly opened the folder containing the 3 photos I had taken of her. Oh, God, she moaned, closing her eyes. Please, please don't do this. Jonathan will be broken. You really need to learn to listen better, Priscilla. I said you had a chance to evade detection. You have until 4:30 local time in Melbourne, so considering daylight saving time, you have just over 3.5 hours to return home. But it's almost noon. That's not enough time. Oh, it will be difficult, but there are several direct flights that will get you there in good time. And they really were, if she had immediately left her lover and her luggage to buy a ticket. Here's my business card. Call or mail me on my mobile no later than 4:30, and the email with attachments will never leave my drafts folder. Well, unless I suspect you're exhibiting poor judgment, as you've been doing lately. You call me at the appointed time, and from that moment you behave as a wife should behave towards Jonathan as her husband, and the letter and photographs will never see the light of day. She took my business card, reading my name and title, and I finally saw it dawn on her. She swallowed loudly, looking up at me with fear. I smiled and nodded, confirming her unspoken question. Yes, I was that Dave. As I watched, I saw the exact moment when she remembered the story her husband had told her. Okay, now she knows exactly how uncompromising I could be. At that moment, from the corner of my eye, I saw the driver holding a sign with my name. I turned a quarter to wave at him, and when I turned back, Priscilla was deep in thought next to the luggage carousel. Her lover was walking towards her again. Looking at my watch, I realized that I didn't have time to watch what would happen next. Was on the verge of making it to my first meeting on time. From that moment on, Priscilla's fate and the fate of my best professional friend were in her hands and in the hands of the gods. Priscilla Paul was nobody to me when Dave pushed me. I didn't even try to explain myself. All I could tell him was, I need to get back to Melbourne. Forget my number. My treatment of Paul showed me that there was not an iota of doubt left in my soul that I wanted to save my marriage. Current circumstances don't count. I love Jonathan. Dave was right. Jonathan didn't deserve what I did. Jonathan saved me years ago. He was a knight in shining armor for me and my children, and I repaid him by cheating. And all this because Paul reminded me of Jerome, my first husband. Jerome, who left me while I was still crazy in love with him. Jerome, who loved me on the morning of the day he left, never to appear again. I should have hated him for his betrayal. Instead, I always felt like I needed clarification, an explanation of why. Why when I did nothing but love and support him emotionally and financially? Why when I maintained my figure and was ready to satisfy him at his first call? I still don't understand what I did to make him leave. In some way, my affair with Paul was a way to get the closure that had been denied me for almost 30 years. The fact that he also made my 52-year-old ass feel young when the impending birth of Jared's second child made me feel old was just a nice bonus. For the first time since meeting Paul, I felt ashamed of what I had done. Dave's words made me admit that all my excuses for cheating were empty. I looked at my watch. Time was passing too quickly. I scanned the entire length of the carousel. My luggage was nowhere in sight, and made a split-second decision. Fuck my new Victoria's Secret lingerie. Screw the little black dress I bought especially for this weekend. Fuck my phone charger. I left my luggage and walked as quickly as possible in my ridiculously high heels to the check-in counters. I was born the daughter of a rich man, accustomed to privilege and being treated with respect. This served me well when a man in a three-piece suit rushed past me, waving his briefcase to take his place ahead of me in line. As I waited with barely contained impatience, my stomach knotted with delay, I allowed memories I would normally deny to fill my mind. Vague, barely visible images of the mother I never really knew, who died when I was 4 years old. Would anything have been different if she had survived? Did she love my father? I found it hard to believe. With me, he was always strict and aloof, never affectionate. Later, when I was a teenager, I realized that he was also a racist and a snob, and these were his best qualities. Would he have been kinder, more supportive? Would I have rebelled the way I did? Would I fall so deeply in love with a man I knew my father would hate? A young, half-Aboriginal ex-convict, ironically hired to work with money my father had given to a local charity as a tax evasion. His name was Jerome, and he cleaned our pool. I slept with Jerome. I became pregnant by him, and to provoke my angry father, I married him. My father's reaction was as cruel as it was predictable. As soon as I announced that abortion was not an option, he kicked me out. Complete and final alienation. I was brought back into the present frown of the three-piece suit. It only took me a moment to understand why he was making his irritation known. The couple currently being served were Asian and clearly had little English. The more I listened, the more my irritation grew. Why couldn't they afford to hire a second person to help at the counter? Brisbane is the state capital, damn it. My attention returned to the three-piece suit. He turned his head this way and that, looking around at the other airline counters. It woke me up from my stupidity. Why was I waiting in the Qantas queue? Just because I flew into Brisbane on their flight didn't mean I had to fly back to Melbourne with them. The three-piece suit took a step towards the Virgin Australia counter and decided for me. I took off my heels and, ignoring the surprised looks, ran to the Virgin counter, beating the three-piece to the finish line. He was unhappy, but I didn't care. I'd like a 12 o'clock flight to Melbourne, please. Madam, I have a couple of seats left on this flight, but the gates will be closing soon. Do you have luggage to check in? There is nothing. I will need some form of identification. I gave her my driver's license as well as my credit card and quietly begged her to quickly enter my information into the computer. I took the liberty of checking you in, Mrs. Carstairs, but still, you will have to run to catch your flight on time. Here is your boarding pass. My fingers closed around the ticket and I ran towards the gate, holding my purse to my side with my elbow to keep it from dangling. As I ran, I looked down to check the gate number, then scanned the signs overhead for the corresponding gate number. I felt like I was in a movie, an innocent woman dodging and running away from the enemy. Only I wasn't innocent. All I could do was pray that my guilt would not be punished by fate. When I saw the line at security, I sighed. I made my decision and headed towards what seemed to be the fastest-moving line and prayed that it wouldn't be like the supermarket where I never quite picked the fastest one. I threw my purse into the plastic tray, at least by taking off my shoes beforehand, which were covered in metal rivets and buckles and would probably set off metal detectors. I saved some time. After pushing the tray onto the conveyor belt, I headed toward the metal detector, only to hear the alarm go off. "Please remove your belt, madam." I sighed. So much for saving time by already taking off your shoes. Even as I was returning to the trays, I began to unbuckle my big, fancy belt buckle. And when I pulled it through the loops of my jeans, I threw it without ceremony in the tray. I went through the metal detector again and breathed a sigh of relief when the employee gave me the sign. I didn't even think about putting the belt back on. I just stuck it in my purse next to my heels. I ran again, blessing the time my personal trainer had me spend running on the treadmill. I literally slid the last 2 meters to the gate, out of breath, as I handed my ticket to the employee. "You're just in time," the employee said with a smile, scanning my ticket before handing it back to me. "Please use the back stairs as you are in seat 23B. I nodded, still out of breath. I took out my heels and roughly put them on my feet, clumsily adjusting the straps. One good thing that came with arriving so late on the flight was that most people were already in their seats, their carry-on luggage already stowed, making finding my own seat much quicker and easier. I sank into my seat, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I did it. This flight will get me to Melbourne in 3 quarters. I will have enough time to contact Dave and prevent my affair from being discovered. Relaxing, I turned my head to see who was sitting next to me. It was a young mother nursing a baby, a little girl with dark curls. Looking at those curls made me think of my daughter, Carly. She too had curls as a baby, silky black, and combined with the creamy coffee complexion inherited from her father, she always looked Spanish. As I remembered Carly as a baby, I remembered other things, like the cleaning job I found a few weeks after I brought her home from the hospital. I looked at my hands. They showed no signs of hard work. Numerous manicures and jars of hand cream took care of that. It wasn't hard for me to do such menial work. Since my father had rejected Jerome, we had little choice, and although my modest earnings did not provide us with much comfort, I considered us lucky. I was definitely happy. Even going from a mansion to a tiny trailer didn't bother me. To me, that little trailer contained more love than my dad's entire huge house. So much love that I got pregnant again, and Jared joined our happy family a month early after a difficult pregnancy. Things became even more difficult than usual in the last month or 2 of pregnancy, as I was unable to work, and the unemployment benefits we received barely covered the rent. Despite the difficulties, I was still happy, and made sure Jerome knew I had no regrets. I never complained, even when I was trying to cope with 2 children while working. But, as it turned out, my happy family was just an illusion. Jerome, true to his Aboriginal heritage, felt uneasy being tied to one place. He talked longingly about the outback and told me stories about his grandfather going on the journey. However, I never thought that he would actually leave me, leave us. How wrong I was. One day I returned home from work after a long bus ride to discover that 5-year-old Carly is babysitting Jared. The car, Jerome, and all valuables, including my grandmother's brooch, were gone. I later learned that the meager contents of our bank account were also missing. Even worse, he left me in debt without paying the last month's rent for the trailer. The trailer park manager turned a deaf ear to my pleas. No amount of tears moved him. The kids and I went from having a happy, if modest, home to being homeless. That's how Jonathan found us. The sound of a voice through the loudspeaker brought me back to the present. I sighed. Instead of the expected seatbelt warnings, we were notified of an expected 30-minute delay due to the need to remove baggage from the hold for a passenger who did not show up for the flight. After hearing the reason for the delay, I couldn't control my poisonous thoughts. Damn the airline rule that says that if some idiot passenger falls asleep in the terminal and doesn't show up at the gate after check-in, everyone else is stuck waiting for their luggage to be removed from the plane. I was hoping the idiot would die in his sleep. Looking down, I saw that my knuckles were white. I was clutching my purses so tightly. Taking a few deep breaths, I made a conscious effort to loosen my grip. "Relax," I told myself. "What's the worst that can happen? You'll arrive at 3:45 instead of 3:15. You'll still have enough time to contact Dave and prevent disaster." To distract myself more than for any other reason, I let my thoughts wander to my meeting with Jonathan. What I remembered most from our first meeting was his kindness and caring. He looked at me with his soft gray eyes, and I immediately knew that I could trust him. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked me. Those 7 words were enough to open the floodgates and make me choke on my story. Of course, my sobbing had the same effect on Carly and Jared. Poor Jonathan. Although it didn't bother him, somehow he put us all at ease, reassured us, and instilled enough confidence in me that I didn't mind as he bustled us into his car. And I didn't mind when he took us to the trailer park and helped me pack the remaining things that wouldn't fit in the only suitcase I had. Tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered how he sat down in front of Carly and Jared, offering them ice cream each. Gently but firmly, he ordered them to sit under a large elm tree while he and I filled the trunk of his car with what little kitchen utensils and linens I had. And it didn't stop there. He took us to his house, which had a small 2-room guest apartment located in the back corner of the property. After he left us and insisted that we unpack and make ourselves at home, he went and did his shopping for the week. Not since I left my father's house have I seen the refrigerator and pantry so stoked. It was like Christmas. Much later, when I finally felt that the children and I would not be thrown out into the streets, I dared to ask Jonathan what he was doing in the park that day. By that time, I had already worked as his housekeeper for several weeks, and knew that he worked on the other side of the city, far from the park. I was driving to advertise an apartment for rent at a real estate agency, which is located opposite the park. He must have seen the look of panic on my face. I definitely remember the sensation squeezing my chest until I could barely breathe. "Don't worry, Priscilla," he said, patting my hand comfortingly. "The fact that you and the children live in an apartment turned out to be much better for me. Now I come home to a clean house and a home-cooked dinner. And to clean and iron my clothes," I added, at least so he knew how much I was doing. "Yes, and it is also." A lump formed in my throat from the memories. Not once did he make me feel like a beggar whom he took under his wing. He never made it seem like charity. He was always nothing but generous and supportive. He entrusted me with the keys to his house, opened accounts for me to make purchases for both households, and even paid me a small salary. I could rob him, run away with his money. Hell, I could sneak up on him in the middle of the night and stab him while he was sleeping. And I think, in a way, that's what I did. I hit him in the back, only I waited almost 30 years to do it. Coming to terms with the truth of what I had done was too much. My mind recoiled from this. I only met Paul 4 times. It wasn't love, it was completed. This was the last wave of the hand of youth. Jonathan doesn't know, and if God is merciful, he'll never know. I will fix it. The simultaneous movement of the plane along with the pilot's announcement interrupted my thoughts. I checked my watch. Takeoff was 40 minutes late. I frowned and prayed that there would be no more delays. Once the plane leveled off, I took out my phone and checked the weather forecast for Melbourne. As a city, it had a reputation for being the place to experience all 4 seasons in one day, and the last thing I needed was for some unexpected storm to delay the flight even further. I relaxed, sunny with possible rain. Calmed, I returned to my thoughts. I'm sure Jonathan has no idea about my short-term affair. What he doesn't know can't hurt him. I just need to keep him in the dark. Really? What harm have I done? After almost 30 years, I had a small hobby. Flirting that didn't threaten Jonathan or our marriage in any way. Not for a moment during my time with Paul did the thought of leaving Jonathan even arise. In fact, in some ways, Jonathan benefited from it. Being with Paul made me feel young and sexy. Jonathan was the recipient of my renewed libido. What's the worst that could happen? If Jonathan finds out, I'll have to throw myself at his feet and beg for forgiveness. He loves me. He won't want to lose me and the children. It may take time, and it may be difficult, but he will forgive me. I've been thinking about this for a while. What if he doesn't forgive me? What if he kicks me out? We had a marriage contract. Cheating on either side meant leaving the marriage almost empty-handed. Even when I was worried about the infidelity clause, I brushed it aside. The agreement was drafted and signed almost 30 years ago, and there have been several cases in the news recently of courts overturning prenuptial agreements. Besides, I simply could not imagine that Jonathan would want to see me without a livelihood. After all, he had saved me from such a fate once before. He was the type of human knight in light armor, not an avenger. And then there's Carly and Jared and their kids. If he leaves me because of one small offense, leaving me without a livelihood, the children will abandon him. It would be devastating for him to lose them. He won't risk it, no matter how upset he is with me. Once again, my thoughts wandered to the past. I closed my eyes and saw Carly and Jared's faces when we returned home with our groceries to find that Jonathan had set up a small play area for them, including a swing, a slide, and a climbing frame in the backyard. How many times have I looked out the window to see Jonathan pushing one of them on the swing? Too many to count. Same with the pool he built when they got a little older. How many times have I watched him play and splash with them? So many that one merged with the other. He was a wonderful father, patient but strict, and always giving of his time. He never missed a football game, a school event, or a birthday. He loved my children, always loved, and always will love, I was sure of that. And now we had grandchildren, and I knew for sure that he loved being a grandfather as much as he loved being a father. He would be heartbroken if Carly and Jared cut him out of their lives and their children's lives, and that would probably happen if he divorced me and left me destitute. Blood, after all, is thicker than water. He won't risk it. The more I thought about it, the more confident I became. I may have to eat a bitter pill and suck up to Jonathan to win him back and restore his pride, but I won't lose him. What if by some coincidence I'm wrong? Well, then I'll fight Jonathan in court. I will live with Carly and her husband Jack, and I will plead my youth and situation as a young single mother who had no choice but to sign a prenuptial agreement. I was a good and loving wife to him for almost 30 years. The courts will not allow him to put me on the street without a livelihood. Again, the pilot's thin voice through the loudspeaker brought me back to reality. With his words, my chest felt empty, as if my heart had fallen into my stomach. More delays. A medical emergency flight bound for Melbourne meant that all other incoming flights had to maintain the holding pattern. Lord, how long will this take? Please, God, no more than 20 minutes. That would leave me 20 minutes to get off the plane and find a landline phone to call Dave. Every minute without an update was excruciating. Time seemed to pass too quickly. In my thoughts, I saw an hourglass, where the sand rushed through a narrow funnel, forming an ever larger pyramid at the base. I checked my watch. 15 minutes have passed. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. "Miss, when the hell is the pilot going to land this flying truff?" I asked. The young flight attendant annoyed, grabbing her arm to make her stop. "Sorry?" she asked, smiling. I asked, "When are we going to land? These delays are unbearable. What kind of airline do you have here? I have an important, meeting, and if we don't land soon, I'll be late." "Madam, this is an air doctor flight we are awaiting. This means a patient with a critical injury or illness, possibly a matter of life and death. I'm sorry, but aviation regulations dictate that this is more important than passenger meetings, business meetings, related flights, sense of self-worth, or any other reason for their journey. The pilot's hands are tied. We cannot land without permission from Melbourne Air Traffic Control. We appreciate your patience." "Bitch," I thought, forming what I hoped looked like a smile. The minutes seemed like rockets, rapidly flying forward, but each second seemed to contain 1,001 thoughts and feelings, too many for such a short period of time. "Hello, this is your captain, John Smith. I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the air doctor flight has landed. The bad news is that since we refueled in Brisbane, we are asked to maintain our holding pattern until then, until fuel-starved flights land. We estimate the additional delay to be approximately 20 minutes. We thank you for your patience." "Damn! No!" The words came out uncontrollably, loud enough to attract the attention of the surrounding passengers. The looks directed at me ranged from amused to outraged. I hung my head, ashamed, looking at my watch, counting. At best, the delay meant I would only have 15 minutes to get off the plane and find my phone. In the worst case, 5 minutes. It was too risky. I needed to contact Dave. I needed to let him know about the delays. I leaned over and pulled my purse out from under the seat in front of me. Fighting panic, I fumbled for my phone. He slid down. I had to pull it out from under my wallet, belt, and notebook. The screen was black. I frowned. Did I turn it off earlier? I didn't remember. I knew the battery was almost empty. I noticed this when I received text messages from Paul before takeoff, which seemed like an eternity ago. I pressed the power button. Nothing. No. 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 It cannot be discharged. But he was. Why didn't I charge it before I left? Why did I pack my spare charger, leaving the main one at home in my suitcase and not in my purse? Because you wanted to be able to tell Jonathan with a half-truth that you forgot to charge it, and that's why you missed his calls. Whispering to myself, I pressed the power button again, praying for a miracle. Nothing happened. What should I do? Please allow us to land in time for me to reach the public telephone in the terminal. I looked at my watch, silently begging for time to stop until we landed. I looked for signs on the faces of the flight attendants about when we would land. I silently begged the pilots to announce that we were next to land. The wait was unbearable. My nerves were on edge. One more delay, and I felt they would burst. 4:05 4:12. With every minute that passed, without any news from the airline, I found it difficult to contain my panic. I don't want to lose my husband. I don't want to fight him in court. I don't want to explain to my children why their father and I are at odds. I want my old life back. The one where Jonathan looks at me condescendingly. His eyes are full of love and tenderness. 4:17. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning our landing approach. We thank you for your patience during these unexpected delays and... I didn't hear the rest of the announcement. All that mattered to me was that we were landing. Finally, I slid the strap of my bag over my shoulder. I fully intended to be the first one off the plane, even if I had to push through other passengers to do so. The feeling of pressure as we leaned in to land was more than welcome. The sound of the wheels touching the runway was music to my ears. The roar of the reverse thrust was a real symphony. As soon as the fasten seatbelt sign went out, I jumped up, making my way to the back exit. They'd better start disembarking from the back of the plane. I felt waves of anxiety leaving me. Other passengers and even flight attendants avoided looking at me directly. They probably thought I was crazy. And they weren't so wrong. Opening the back doors was like opening a floodgate, and I rushed out like a flood, running down the steps to the runway. I entered the terminal at full speed, my eyes darting left and right, searching for the public phone. I rushed forward, oblivious to the glances of other passengers, scanning ahead, desperately searching for my phone. As I approached the main terminal where all the shops and eateries were located, I saw him. Relief gave me one last burst of speed, and I barely stopped in front of the phone booth. A quick glance at the phone told me it accepted both credit cards and coins. Thank goodness, because I wasn't sure how much change I had. I pulled my wallet out of my bag, cursing myself for not thinking ahead and holding it in my hand. 4:29. I inserted my Visa, holding Dave's business card at eye level, and began dialing the number. Credit card payments are temporarily unavailable on this phone. Please use coins. The recorded message made me want to scream. As it was, I moaned. I fiddled with my wallet. I only had 50, 20, and 10 cents. I prayed it would be enough to connect to Dave's cell phone. Again, I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, holding Dave's business card in one hand and dialing the number with the other. The call went straight to voicemail. "Dave, I'm in Melbourne. Where?" My time is up. No. God. No. I looked at my watch. 4:32. My legs became weak. I sank to the floor, still clutching the phone. My life as I knew it was over. Dave at this very moment contacts Jonathan, informing him of my betrayal. Possible words and phrases that could complete his letter flashed through my stunned mind. My mind was too shocked to stop and grab one of them. I saw pictures of Dave and Paul again, me kissing Paul. Jonathan will be devastated. Heart is broken, destroyed, and it's all my fault. I saw Jonathan's face as clearly as if he were standing in front of me. His broken face, full of grief, tears flowed down his cheeks. The only other time I'd seen that look on his face was when we almost lost Carly to meningitis. At that moment, it dawned on me how dear he was to me, how much I love him and need him. The feeling of guilt made me swallow convulsively. I had wronged him in the worst possible way, and to add to my crimes, I had spent every minute since Dave confronted me rationalizing what I had done, minimizing my actions, justifying yourself. What the hell was I telling myself? Closing. Why did I need closure for a relationship where my children and I were not only abandoned, but left destitute and in debt? Worse, am I so vain and shallow, so pathetic, that I need a guy to make me feel attractive and desirable? It seems so. How could I even think about fighting Jonathan in court? How can I be so selfish? How could I become so self-centered? The idea of being on the opposite side of anything from Jonathan is simply wrong. Have I, despite myself, become my father? My stomach clenched so hard with shame. Dave, 4 o'clock, showed the bottom corner of my laptop screen. I sighed, not knowing if it was a blessing or a curse that my afternoon meeting ended early, leaving me time to think. Come on, Priscilla. Call, damn it. Call. I reread my letter to Jonathan, tweaking it here and there, although I wish I had deleted it rather than edited it. 4:07. I checked the volume and charge of the phone. I knew they were fine, but I needed something to keep my hands busy. I stared at the screen, willing it to light up with an incoming call. She should have landed by now. I'm not used to regrets, but I really kicked myself for being distracted and losing sight of her at the airport. Any sign that she had returned to her lover on the street or had rushed to the front desk would have made my decision easier. I killed some time writing down every possible flight number she might have been on. Having done this, I crossed out all those that had already landed. The remaining list was very small. Please, I begged her silently. Please don't make me be the one to destroy my friend and mentor. Please don't make me be the bearer of such devastating information. Please love him enough to want to protect him from such pain. Please want to save your marriage. 4:14. I growled in irritation. With concentrated movements, I brought the cup of coffee to my lips. I would rather throw it at the opposite wall, hence my overly controlled actions. Call me, you selfish, arrogant bitch. 4:19. I rolled my neck back and forth, trying to relieve the tension. It didn't work. I got up and started walking back and forth. It's not a cure, but it's better. 4:23. As I watched, the status of the last non-landed flight from Brisbane to Melbourne before 4:30 a.m. changed from delayed to landed. Everyone else had already been on the ground for at least half an hour. Call. Damn it. Call. This man is the best thing that ever happened to you. Call. Walking was no longer helping. The temporary office they had given me in Brisbane was too small to accommodate my stress. Push-ups are what they are. 1. Should I do what I was going to do? 2. It's come to this. If she wants to save her marriage and prevent Jonathan from being destroyed, she will be in Melbourne right now. 3. If she calls now, I will remain silent and not devastate my friend. I will not bear, even if indirectly, responsibility for the destruction of his life. 4. If she doesn't call, it means she's staying in Brisbane. She is not interested in saving her marriage. She has already decided to leave Jonathan and may even have taken action to come out of the divorce in a better position. I got to 15 when a terrible thought occurred to me. Crap! Did I make a huge error in judgment? Could she have used the time since I left the airport to further her plans to destroy my friend? 16. If that's the case, what kind of friend am I by helping a good person get deceived? Again? I only did 20 push-ups. I swear that if Jonathan is deceived, I will help him in any way I can. Emotional support, financial support, Hitman, 429. Damn you, heartless bitch. I logged back into my laptop, which went into sleep mode. I was immediately redirected to my draft letter. My finger hovered over the send icon. I moaned. I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell him such news in such an impersonal way. 4:30. Time has slowed down. I stared at this terrible instrument for what seemed like an eternity. 4:31. I reached for the phone. Jonathan's number was one of the last on my call list. Hi, Dave. How's Brisbane? Hearing Jonathan's voice almost made me lose my own. Jonathan, I have bad news. Information I really don't want to know. Silence in response. Are you there? Yes. Okay. Go ahead. Did we lose the contract? I closed my eyes. Of course, he assumed it was about work. He trusted Priscilla. She and the children were everything to him. No, buddy. Everything's fine from the work side. That concerns Priscilla. She was on the same flight as me this morning. Sat ahead of me, actually. Then I told him everything. Seeing the photo on her phone, watching her kiss her lover, assuming it wasn't the first time, confrontation, the choice I offered her, her obvious solution. All this time, Jonathan remained silent. At the end, I asked if he wanted copies of the photos and asked him to approve my actions. To the first question, he simply answered, "Yes, please," in a voice clearly trying to remain under control. The answer to the second was preceded by a few seconds of silence. Thanks, buddy. You did the right thing. I need to go. The conversational tone informed me that he had hung up. My conscience soared before a fundamental sadness about my friend's fate brought me back to earth. Finally, I hit send on my email. I was worried that I was 2 states away from him and couldn't offer comfort or at least reassure him that he wouldn't do something stupid. Then I scolded myself. Belinda, my soulmate. Since Sue left the picture, was sitting at home, just 10 blocks from where my friend was suffering. I picked up the phone again and called her, smiling. Belinda really was as smart as Sue thought. She listened to the story and was walking to her car when I finished. After asking for the address, she hung up. Priscilla. Are you okay? The old woman's kind words brought me back to the present. Yes, thanks for your concern. I tried to get to my feet, doing my best to smile at the obviously reassuring old woman who was still looking at me with a worried look. I turned to the central terminal, forcing my brain to think clearly and not slip back into panic. Telephone. I needed to find another phone, one that actually accepted a credit card, and call Jonathan. I hope my call reaches him before Dave's letter does. Confessing from me must be better than hearing it from someone else. It took me 2 tries to find a fully working public phone. If I wasn't so focused on reaching Jonathan, I would be outraged by the poor service from Telstra. First, I tried to call his cell phone, but it went to voicemail. I thought about leaving a message, but decided against it. I wanted to talk to him directly. I knew Jonathan would be home. He often worked from home on Fridays, so I called the landline. I held back my tears when he too went to voicemail. When, oh my God, will I be able to contact him? Desperately wanting him to hear it from me first, I decided to confess everything. The details could be discussed in person when we met face to face. Jonathan, it's me, Pris. Honey, I did a terrible thing, and I'm so sorry about it. It's not because of you. It's not because of what you did or didn't do. Oh God, I'm all mixed up. It's so hard to tell you. I'm so embarrassed. Oh God, I had an affair. Just flirting, really. I was stupid and vain for letting things get out of hand with a young man. His name is Paul, and we only met 4 times. I swear it's true, darling. Please believe me when I say I love only you. I was stupid, selfish cow. I know it. And I can't tell you how sorry I am. I was seeing him this weekend in Brisbane, but I ran into your colleague, Dave. I can't remember his last name. And he made me realize what a terrible and wrong thing I did. And I wish I could take it all back. Go back in time and make a different choice. Please forgive me. Please don't go. I heard the squeak of shutdown. I've run out of time. I felt in my purse for a handkerchief to wipe away the tears that my confession had caused. "What's next, Pris?" I quietly asked myself. "Home," I answered. "Take a taxi home and beg like never before." Decision made, I headed to one of the many exits from the terminal. As luck would have it, there was a line at the taxi stand. Of course there was. It was late Friday night, and everyone wanted to get home. Finally, it was my turn. I looked at the driver and held back a groan. He was a Sikh. Please let him speak clear English. I gave my Carlton address and received a nod in response. Friday afternoon traffic was terrible and, as usually happens when you're in a hurry, it seems like every traffic light turns red as we approach. Sometimes it seemed to me that I could walk faster than we were going. All the time, I looked out the window, holding back tears, and prayed. I prayed like never before, going over everything in my head over and over again. Did the worst that could happen change after my confession and/or Dave's revelation? I, better than anyone, knew how deeply Jonathan was hurt by the betrayal of his first wife. After all our years together, will he give me another chance? Or will I be thrown out on the street too? If it came to this, would he be generous in the settlement, or would he show no mercy? If I had to fight for my share of our assets, I no longer knew whether I would have the strength to do it or not. Finally, we stopped at the mailbox at my house. Jonathan's car was parked in the driveway. At least he was home. I walked along the path like a man condemned to the gallows. I prepared myself for Jonathan's rage, for the venom that I was sure was in store for me. I deserved every angry word, every insult. All I could do was hope that by releasing the poison that my actions had injected into his heart, he would allow me to make amends for what I had done. Should I ring the doorbell or just walk in? With a deep sigh, I decided to use my key, allowing myself entry, until Jonathan said otherwise. This was still my home. There was silence in the house. I called, but no one answered. Is he ignoring me? Confused, I checked the kitchen, then the master bedroom and the bathroom. No sign of Jonathan. My heart began to beat wildly. Where is he? His car is here. Could one of our friends come and pick him up? I walked into the formal dining room and checked out the backyard from the windows. No sign. There was only one room left where he could be, his office. I frowned as I stood in the doorway. He had definitely been in this room recently, but it was in disarray, which was not his style. Jonathan was usually a tidy person. His chair was pushed to the side, and the small coffee table was pushed too. There were papers scattered in what Jonathan always called organized chaos on his desk, but also underneath it, and it was unusual. After following the trail of documents, I noticed that the phone had been taken off the hook. I frowned. It was strange. And then I noticed that the answering machine was open, without the usual cassette. Panic gripped my heart. I had a bad feeling. I lowered my head to my chest, trying to regulate my breathing, which had become low and shallow. From the corner of my eye, I noticed something sticking out from under the wheel of Jonathan's office chair. I bent down and took it out, struggling with it sticking to the carpet. Sticker? Why did Jonathan need the sticker? Layerdal HS1. What the hell is Layerdal HS1? I sank into Jonathan's chair and wheeled myself into a comfortable position in front of the PC. One press of the keyboard showed that Jonathan was not logged out. I went to Google and typed in the name from the label. Oh my God, the Heart Start 1 defibrillator. I swallowed my panic again and again, afraid to let my mind go where it wanted to go. I leaned forward, accidentally hitting the mouse, and opened Outlook. He sent letters to the children. I scanned a few lines, but the only word I caught was prenuptial agreement. I shook my head, worrying later that the kids would find out what a fool I had been. Now I needed to get to Jonathan. I needed to know how terribly he regrets it, how much I love him, and how much he needs to fight for his life. I opened a new Google page and searched for the nearest hospital. With shaking hands, I called and asked if Jonathan had been accepted. My worst fears were confirmed. Jonathan was in the emergency room. He suffered a heart attack. I rushed to the kitchen and grabbed the car keys off the hook before rushing into the garage. Waiting for the garage door to lift enough for me to pull out was excruciating. I entered the hospital's address into my car's navigation as I drove, praying for Jonathan's survival the entire time. Please do not die. Please don't let him die. What the hell happened? Jonathan was strong as an ox. He always underwent semi-annual medical examinations of his company, with the results of a person 15 years younger than his chronological age. I didn't know who I was praying to. God? Jonathan? All I knew was that if I prayed and begged hard enough, Jonathan would be spared. Hell, it might even turn out to be a good thing. I could be his nurse. He won't be able to take care of himself, and I'll have what? 1, maybe 2 weeks when he will need me? If I can't convince him to forgive me during this time, then things are irreparable. The journey seemed very long. How I got there safe and sound with tears blinding me, I will never know. As usual, parking anywhere near the hospital was a nightmare. Luckily, the emergency room was well indicated. A bored receptionist was taking her time getting data from a mother and her baby. For what? The snotty child only had a scratch on his knee. This was obvious from the way he was digging with his foot at the leg of the chair he was sitting on. When it was finally my turn, the nurse took my information, made a short call, then told me to wait with the others. I must have sat there for almost an hour, guessing that they were busy admitting Jonathan once he was stabilized. Luckily, I grabbed a spare phone charger on the way out of the house, and the reception area had a convenient wall outlet. I was distracted by Googling heart attack care and a few other things that I'm not particularly proud of at the time, but I'm a firm believer in considering all options. I read about stents and bypass surgery. Everyone seemed to require a minimum of 2 weeks of bed rest. The reception nurse herself came and woke me up. I was ushered through the doors between the waiting room and the reception area itself. She didn't say much as I was led into a small office just outside the doors. A tired man in a white robe sat there. Must be the doctor. He stood up when I came in, so he's an old-fashioned guy. The middle-aged woman remained sitting with him. As soon as I sat down, I prepared to hear the diagnosis, armed with all my new knowledge. Memories of the following events are hazy at best. Somewhere in the first sentence there was the phrase, "dead on arrival." I have no idea if I actually fell to the floor. Strange, it seemed like I was falling for an unreasonably long time. All my completely insufficient what's the worst from earlier that day burst into my brain with a huge noise. Dave. I was completely exhausted when the call woke me up from my nap. It was after 9 a.m. and it was Carly, Jonathan's daughter, confirming that I had heard the news and asking me to come to their father's house. Oh yes, I heard the news, of course. That's why I hardly slept a minute. Yet, as the first rays of dawn painted the world pink, I knew that I was not responsible for my friend's death. How? Jonathan told me. Unable to sleep, I got up quietly so as not to wake Belinda. As usual, I checked my emails and messages on my phone. I was too busy the previous night to watch. There was a voicemail that turned out to be from John. The departure time was 4:55 the previous day. Feeling as if I was communicating with the dead, I pressed the button to listen to what he left behind. The message was short, simple, and it was obvious that it was left by someone in pain. Thanks for being a true friend, buddy. Bye. I went back to bed and crawled into Belinda's arms, and she held me as I mourned the great man. Belinda accompanied me to Jonathan's house, and we were almost right in our guesses about what they wanted. I said they. Yes, Jared took the night terror from Perth and joined Carly at their old family home. They wanted to know what killed their father and, like many of the recent mourners, to know who to blame. After establishing that Jonathan had sent them a letter before the hospital contacted them to tell them that their father had died and that their mother was still there, sedated, Belinda and I created a timeline for them. Belinda managed to quickly get to John's house, noticed his car, but no one answered the doorbell. She allowed herself to walk around the house, looking in the windows, so she saw him lying on the floor. Luckily, the back door was open, so she ran inside. Jonathan was lying on the floor, clutching his home phone in one hand and, Oddly enough, his answering machine in the other. She couldn't find Jonathan's pulse. She rolled him onto his back with one hand while she called 00 with the other. Under the direction of the emergency operator, she began CPR. She had been on the verge of exhaustion for what she guessed was about 10 minutes when the ambulance arrived. They moved all the furniture to the walls and connected the AED. At that moment, Belinda left the room to call me. By the time we calmed each other down, the paramedics had taken Jonathan away on a stretcher and headed to the ambulance. I asked Belinda to return to John's office and describe the scene. As a result of this description, she followed the ambulance to the hospital, and the back seat of her car was covered with John's cell phone, the answering machine tape, the envelope with the legal document, my email to John Athan with attachments, and the signed email she found right next to the keyboard on table. I was on my way back to Brisbane Airport and on the next flight home. Belinda met me at the airport with news that wasn't much of a surprise. While sitting in the waiting room, a woman she recognized as Priscilla came in and sat down playing with her phone. Almost an hour later, Priscilla was taken away and did not appear again. Belinda pressed the emergency room nurse for news. It was only after she said that she had performed CPR and called an ambulance that she was told anything. Even then, it was limited to the phrase, "The lady was received and reassured after receiving devastating news." The timeline we constructed showed that Jonathan was busy in the last half hour of his life. Some details were, of necessity, speculation. I called him at 4:31, then he must have read my letter. There, on the table, were printed photographs. After that, he probably looked in the file cabinet for his prenuptial agreement with Priscilla. It was a legal document in an envelope. We read it together and it said, among other things, that the party who commits infidelity in a marriage walks away with nothing but personal belongings. Not surprising considering how his first marriage imploded. From there, he wrote a one-page letter to his children, expressing his love for them and his grandchildren, born and unborn. Then he described my call and letter. That's how they found out my name. He apologized for the impending divorce and how ruthlessly he was going to treat their mother. Their mother, he told them, knew his views on adultery, so she should not have been surprised that he intended to strictly adhere to the marriage contract. In contrast, he was going to take care of them and leave all his worldly possessions to them and not to her. His love for them shone through the text, but his bitterness towards their mother grew. The evidence of hatred shocked his children. They understood much better after I shared the unknown story of their first mother and my own experience of love turning to hate. Terrible self-knowledge when a person realizes that everything he considered true for years was a lie, that their memories were desecrated, their dreams are shattered. The weirdness lessened after my lawyer, who answered the phone on Saturday, answered some questions from me. The only timestamp we could use to estimate the timeline was the message Jonathan left on my voicemail. We appreciated that his heart stopped during or shortly after Priscilla's confession, which we all listened to. We might have missed this piece of evidence if his compression of the recording device had not alerted Belinda to its existence. Once we had worked out the rough sequence of events, I felt it was time for Belinda and I to leave. Chances are the siblings had things they wanted to discuss in private. Just as I turned to signal to Belinda, we all heard a car pull up. We simultaneously turned our heads to the window. Priscilla was getting out of her BMW. Priscilla, like in the hospital. I was slow to open my eyes. When will this nightmare end? The sound of the front door opening and closing made me cringe, and I closed my eyes even tighter. I have never felt so alone and isolated. The nightmare began when I woke up to the noise of the cleaning lady in my room, making noise and noise. I flinched from the sharp noise. I carefully opened my eyes, blinking in an attempt to quickly get used to the light. I moaned. My head hurt. It seemed blurry, as if I was trying to think through a ball of cotton wool. Why am I in the hospital? And then everything came back. Jonathan left, died. I will never feel his arms around me again. I will never see his smile or hear his laugh again. The love of my life is gone. I couldn't stand it. Hot tears filled me. I felt panic begin in my lower back, gaining momentum as it moved up my spine. The sound of an animal in pain pierced my brain. It took a moment for me to realize that it was me. I was that animal screaming in agony. I struggled, struggling with the bedding. Hands held me back. "Here, take this, Mrs. Carstairs." I turned my head back and forth, avoiding the edge of the plastic cup, while simultaneously pushing away the submitted hand. It was necessary to escape. I needed to escape my new reality. "Shh, calm down. Accept it, and you'll feel better." Like a puppet whose strings have been cut, I go limp, unable to support my own weight. The nurse handed me the glass and pills again, and I obediently sipped and swallowed. Within a few minutes, there was calm. Seeing that I was no longer a threat to myself or anyone else, the nurse patted my arm, encouraging me to lean back against the many pillows she was stacking behind me. "Someone will come by soon to make sure you're okay. Just rest until then." I followed the instructions, remaining calm but exhausted. Jonathan left. Forever. My mind was evading the reason. I didn't know how long I waited for discharge. Time has lost its meaning. Everything I did was done on autopilot. My only goal is to get home, to a familiar place where I can cry. I knew I needed to run out of tears before I tried calling Carly and Jared again. Perhaps it was for the best that they didn't answer their phones when I tried earlier. When I saw Carly's car in the driveway, I stopped. I realized that the hospital should have called her. My emotions were mixed. Relief that I didn't have to break the devastating news, and fear of meeting her, knowing that she knew something about my affair. For the second time in 24 hours, I walked to my front door like a convict. I walked into the house and did a double take. Not only was Carly sitting in the living room, but so was Jared. The big surprise, however, was the presence of Dave and a blonde woman who I didn't recognize and could only assume was his wife. I waited for my children to come and hug me, and was puzzled when they remained seated. They both just looked at me disapprovingly. I was speechless, pinned to the spot. Without even looking at me, Dave and his wife stood up and said goodbye, his wife hugging both of my children. Dave hugged Carly but shook Jared's hand. Carly even thanked Dave for what he did for her father. What? Thank him for what? For killing him? After they closed the front door behind them, Jared walked back into the living room and sat down where he had been sitting before. Carly avoided my gaze the entire time he was out of the room. I was simply stunned. Jared exchanged glances with Carly. She nodded, indicating that her younger brother would speak for both of them. "Mother, as you know, I am the executor of my father's will, and I must tell you that after discussions with my sister and others, I intend to act in accordance with my father's last wishes and ensure that the terms of the prenuptial agreement that you both signed many years ago are carried out. Especially the part that says you are leaving with nothing." Jared brandished the prenuptial agreement. His speech was mostly emotionless, and he only looked at me when he pronounced the word "you" with emphasis. His eyes were burning. I was puzzled. Yes, I cheated on their father. It happens to the best of us. Why such hatred? What did they know? It couldn't be much. I went to Brisbane and they had pictures of me kissing another man. I answered automatically. I haven't been inactive for the last half day. Forget about the prenuptial agreement. It only applies if I committed adultery. So, I went to Brisbane and got caught kissing another man. What does that prove? Carly leaned over the coffee table, picked up something, and waved it in front of me. Damn, it was an answering machine tape. The one where, almost certainly, there was my confession. The situation was getting out of control. I needed to get her back under control. Listen, children, this is none of your business at all, but you should know, I've done my research. Even if I can't challenge this ancient prenuptial agreement, the law is clear. Unless otherwise stated, everything that belongs to your father goes to me in accordance with the terms of his last will and testament. Carly stood up, her eyes swollen with anger. This has nothing to do with us. This has nothing to do with us, you evil bitch. Jared interrupted his sister by simply standing up and hugging her. I envied her for this human contact. He made shh noises until her sobs subsided, then turned his attention back to me. Perhaps you mean the will we found in the file cabinet, updated about 5 years ago. The same one? Let me read you something. He picked up the email Jonathan had sent to the kids the previous day. I stood there with my head down as he laid out what Jonathan knew and how he knew. I cringed as it turned into a tirade of hatred, all directed at me. My mind flashed back to the pain Jonathan felt when I first met him, how cautious and reluctant he was to trust. How the hell could I forget about this? My mind tried to make the connection, but my self-defense mechanisms kept stopping it. I forced myself to listen to Jared. He put the terrible letter down again. This letter outlines Father's last wishes. As you can see, he went to the trouble of printing it out and signing it. See? It confused us until Dave called his lawyer. By signing it, he turned it into a new last statement of will. Yes, Mother, you could. I'd like to fight it and the prenuptial agreement in court, but I'm warning you. Carly and I will fight you every step of the way. In disbelief, I looked at Carly. She nodded in agreement. This couldn't be true. This couldn't be happening. Why? Carly broke away from her brother's embrace and stood in front of me. Mom, we grew up hearing the story of how you met Dad, how he took us in when we were on the street. In some ways, it made us love him even more than if he were our real father. He chose to do all these things with us and for us, rather than consider raising us a responsibility. I have more childhood memories of Dad playing with me, helping me with homework, teaching me to ride a bike, swim, and drive a car, than I do of you. I am who I am today, and I think Jared would agree with me. Because of him, not you. You were always too busy with your friends. You never wanted to get your clothes dirty or your hair tangled. We owe everything to him. 82. He loved us all with everything he had. Don't even deny it. Dave told us about Dad's first marriage and how he almost ruined it. You were there. You knew exactly what cheating would do to him, but you still did it. But I never imagined. It just happened. You talk like I'm an evil witch who deliberately destroyed your father, and you talk to that creep Dave like he's your new best friend. He killed your father. Jared stood next to his sister and glared at me with an anger that felt like a physical shove. No, Mom. Dave didn't kill Dad. You did. You stuck the knife in his gut and twisted it. That's what killed him. The truth of this resonated in my soul, but before full acceptance of its truth took over my being, my automatic defense mechanisms intervened, just like the body will twitch for many seconds after life has left it. You can't pay attention to what he wrote in that damn letter. He was just wounded. He spoke in anger. Your father loved me. Jared stepped even closer. Yes, he loved. And yes, he spoke in anger. Imagine sitting there knowing you were having a heart attack. How much hate and passion does it take to write a letter, print it, and even sign it when you could be calling an ambulance for yourself? That's how important his last words were for him. He risked his life for them. That's what I don't understand. How could he die of a heart attack? He was as strong as an ox. God, he had a physical 4 months ago, and the doctor told him he was as healthy as a 40-year-old man. Funny you should mention that, Mom. We asked the hospital the same question. Do you know what they told us? The sarcasm in Carly's voice made me wince as I shook my head. Shock, Mom, shock. Your betrayal shook him to his very core, and his poor broken heart shattered. Your selfishness, your vanity, your damn stupidity, as you so elegantly put it in your confession, destroyed him completely. My children and Jared's children will never know their grandfather because of you, and I will never be able to forgive you for that. I stepped back as if I had been pushed away. Jared walked forward, seemingly attached to me. I will believe until the end of my days that his father's last words were more important to him than his survival. I must believe this because the alternative is too terrible. Carly looked at him with confusion. Yes, the alternative is that he knew the pain of betrayal he was about to experience from the one our faithful mother was supposed to protect. knew the level of agony that was coming, and deliberately decided not to call an ambulance for himself. If I believed in it for at least half a second, I might never be able to sleep again. That he would choose to never know his grandchildren or not let them know him, it's just too terrible to think about. Carly sobbed as she sank back into her chair, her face pale. Jared walked over to her and placed his hand on her shoulder, squeezing it tightly before turning to me again. "So, Mom, it is with our Father's passion that we will fulfill his last wishes." And that's all I remember for a very, very long time. Priscilla sitting on the couch, surrounded by packing boxes, my eyes fell on the small plastic container that held a small portion of Jonathan's ashes. I couldn't look at him for long. It was too painful and surreal. How could it be that something so small, so insignificant, contained the remains of such a great man as Jonathan? I needed movement. I stood up and stretched my legs, then walked aimlessly from one packed box to another, running my fingertips along their edges. So little, in fact, from such a long, rich, and full life together. I guess I should consider myself lucky that the kids let me take as much as they did. They could only force me to leave with clothes and toiletries. Taking a circle around the room, I stopped in front of the wall where a beautiful antique sideboard once stood and looked at the ghostly outline where we hung a reproduction of our wedding. It showed Carly nestled in the crook of Jonathan's arm, his other arm wrapped around my waist, and Jared standing proudly in front of us. We were all smiling, beaming with happiness. Now the empty wall with its ghostly, empty frame spoke to me more eloquently about the emptiness of my future than words. I sighed, tired and sad. I was between a rock and a hard place. I had an impossible solution. I could agree to Jonathan's last wishes and leave without a fight, thus keeping alive the glimmer of hope that one day my children would forgive me and allow me to be a part of their lives. This option meant poverty. My working skills, other than home economics, were non-existent. I was too young to receive a superannuation, but too old to be truly competitive in the job market when I had no qualifications. My other choice is to sue my own children in open court, knowing that by doing so I would lose Carly and Jared and their families forever. And of course, I would refuse Jonathan's last wish. Both options were disgusting. I could blame Dave for what he said to Jonathan. I could blame Jerome, my first husband, for leaving me without explanation. I could blame hormones or aging or Paul for taking advantage of a vulnerable older woman. Hell, many psychologists would tell me that I could blame my mother for dying when I was so young, or my father for being distant and uncaring. But the truth is, yes, I could finally admit that I only have myself to blame. No one forced me to respond to Paul's flattery. Nobody forced me to sleep with him. No one forced me to lie and cheat on the person I vowed to love exclusively for the rest of my life. I made these choices, and now I had to live with the consequences. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.